Thank you very much for having me here tonight. This is exciting for me. It's one of my passions where I had to step off my soapbox at work recently because I was going on a tangent. Everybody's like, the meeting has ended, like we need to go. I'm Justin Smith, and I work for St. Luke's Health System, and I get to be the Senior Director of Advanced Analytics there. It's a very exciting time, as we all know, and I'm kind of preaching the choir here, right? We get it because we're here, but the world is changing, right? And so 2 years ago, I was out giving talks kind of nationally on healthcare and analytics and the exciting work that's going on in that space. And machine learning, we're talking about that a lot. And the word artificial intelligence, AI, kept coming up over and over and over again. And I would ask people, what do you mean by AI? What do you mean by AI? What do you mean by AI? Everyone had more or less a different response. And so I kind of thought about that for a while and then lucked out where I have a really good friend who was an NPR contributor at the time, and was chatting with him about it, and he says, why don't you just do a podcast? I said, yeah, sure, I'll just do a podcast. And he points and he goes, remember what's in my basement? And he's like, I have essentially a recording studio in my basement. I was like, oh, cool, can I use your basement? He says, I thought you'd never ask. So I was able to line up Dr. Jim Fackler, he's a peds intensive PQ doc at Johns Hopkins. Liliana Petrova, she's a business leader kind of throughout a bunch of industries at this point. Tristan Marco, who's a data scientist, a fantastic data scientist over at Providence Health, also in a leadership position there. Camille Obin, she's an intellectual property attorney on the international scale, right, dealing specifically with AI, machine learning, patents, and intellectual property. And finally, David O'Hara, who's a philosophy professor, who is incredible in the sense where he gets invited to these really amazing retreats or closed room functions where he says it's pretty fun because I signed the NDA saying I'm here to share my thoughts with everybody that's there. Mason walks in and he goes, I recognize you as a head of state. I was like, wow, that's a cool room to be in. But they agreed to come on and kind of do this What is AI podcast with me. And we explored lots of different issues, ethics, where's it going as a technology, what are things that we should think about. And so I've kind of summed all of that up into this, I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, this overview. But this is out on iTunes, the podcast, you can find it anywhere. Sometimes I released it February, about this time last year. But if you search What is AI, or feel free to send me a link or a message on either of those. That goes to my LinkedIn account, the .com. Feel free to connect with me and then we can certainly chat and continue the conversation. As I mentioned before, we all know, because we get to experience it day to day, right? But we're in this transitional moment, and we can feel, as society is also feeling, that things are changing, right? Things are happening, events are happening, information is happening at increasing rate and speed, and so it's up to us to figure out how do we use this technology for good and not for evil, right? So one of the things we see is you can't literally flip on any news source and not hear something about artificial intelligence, right? The popular media doesn't call it machine learning, ensemble models, anything like how we would describe it, they just say AI. And so this is literally, it's just a quick search and there's just AI pops up in every news feed at all times. There's increasing public awareness of the word artificial intelligence. And one of the things we talked a lot about in the podcast was, how are these systems being developed to decrease bias? Meaning, the reason why I chose this picture is if you look at this crowd, is it a diverse crowd? Right? Does this data set represent all of humanity? We're trying to build a system that can be representative to help us make decisions? No. This is one of the things that, as practitioners, right, we need to think about these things. Where are my data sets coming from? How are they getting munged together? Did I clean it properly? Right? Am I doing this ethically? What data is being pumped in to create the model, and then are we feeding the model so it's going onto itself and getting, this horrible circular loop. The other thing to think about as well is the idea of this integration between the developer teams, right? AI developers, machine learning developers, data scientists, and the business, right? One of those things to think about is if you're not going to where the events are taking place and they're just getting described to you in third hand, it's easy to miss some really obvious things. There's a lot of examples. If you want to hear more of those examples, please feel free to catch me afterwards. But it's this really, we call them subject matter experts. There's a lot of different words for these, but it's the idea of really integrating with developers, the AI, modelers, with the business leaders. Human feedback to our AI systems. This sounds, again, really simple, but you have to have, or at least at some point, a human in the loop, right? We have this horrible example, I guess, today on the news, Boeing announced they're shutting down the production of the 737 MAX. I guess they're ceasing it. But that's a great example in a very negative way of what happens when you don't have a human in the loop. The pilots were unable to regain control of that aircraft in 2 instances. It was horrible. But we want to make sure that we're thinking about it, especially in healthcare too, is how do we have a human in the loop, right? So what I tell our physicians is, look, I never will build a system that will supersede your critical thinking. I always want you to think as a human being, or your clinical judgment, right? You are the expert in this field as the human being. This system, this AI system or machine learning system is only there to help augment your performance, never to be something that takes over for you. One of the fun things I realized about this picture after I put it in this talk is the human is very nervous grabbing the AI's arm, right? That guy's just veined out there at the bottom. You can see that happening. He's got a death grip on that. Loss of expertise. This is something that we talk about. It hasn't quite happened just yet, but I think it's something that we need to be aware of in the sense of, again, using aviation as an industry. Autopilot is really good. Any pilots, any aviators in the room? Autopilot is fantastic, right? It can do a lot of amazing things. But when things start to go wrong, autopilot's not the answer. You still have to have the human in the cockpit that can take over. Same thing in medicine, right? We want to be able to have systems that can do things really well, but have that human in the loop that has the expertise. Whereas this is kind of might be an issue 10, 15, 50 years down the road to be determined that humans have grown up, they've gone through school, they've had this, intelligence assisted or AI support the whole time, and now it's broken or gone. We're asking them to perform at an expert level, and the expertise may be gone. The idea too of we want to work on building tools that augment individuals, right? That make it so it's essentially easier, it takes tasks away from humans that we're just not good at, right? Tesla's doing this aggressively. Uber is trying to do this aggressively. Think about automated driving. Are we good at driving? We can do it. We're okay, but we tune out a lot, right? From a neuroscience background, we really have, primary and secondary tasks that our brains have developed to handle. So if I'm texting and operating a vehicle, my primary task has now become the text message that I'm involved in, even if I'm not actually looking down at the phone all the time I'm trying to drive, right? And as we know, when you get into automobiles or other things that are happening at quick speeds, things can happen essentially very, very quickly with negative outcomes. So that's the idea of building tools that help to make us better at being human beings. One of the things that came out from my podcast was this idea that we have innately as human beings this fear of technology. And I've got a couple of good examples. New tools scare us, right? So even back in the 1800s, we were destroying textile mills because it was going to take away a whole industry of individuals working in textiles. And it did. It transitioned that work from a human, which could do the work at a certain pace, to mills, which could produce fabric at a faster pace than human beings. So the Luddites and the history associated with that, but we have a very visceral reaction sometimes to scary new technology. It's not just the 1800s. It goes far back as antiquity, right? So Socrates, there's kind of a myth legend that Socrates was absolutely opposed to this idea of writing things down. In the sense where his thought process was, if you memorize these massive amounts of information, you have them innately inside your brain to recall at any time. If you write something down, you no longer have to hold it in your brain. You can put it on the paper and recall it from there, right? And so my argument is we're in a very similar position to where Socrates was, transitioning from memorizing these massive volumes of information to writing things down. And then once it's written down, then you can read it when you want and interpret it as you need to at that moment, right? So that's sort of where we're starting to shift things that we're doing now as human beings into the technology. Same way with Socrates not liking writing. This is a fun one in the sense that, again, we want to use this technology for good and not for evil. Has anybody seen this patent application before? Has this popped up? It's not, I didn't make it up, it's real. So it's the US patent, I won't read the number because it's super long. But this is from our friends at Amazon. And what they designed here is a cage that you put the human being in to race around the floor, to grab things, to put into carts to fulfill package orders faster. Done with the idea of keeping the human being safe. But when you look at it objectively, we've stuck a human being in a cage with a robot arm on it. Right? Like, that doesn't seem like that great of an idea. I believe they killed this and never did it, never went forward. But they proposed it and they actually got, I think it was approved in March 8, 2016. as a patent for Amazon, which, again, when you get going in business, things start happening quickly, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, we can totally do that, no problem. And then somebody draws it up and you go, oh man, should we build that? Like, it looks horrible. What are people gonna think when you have 1,000 human beings reaching a factory floor in a cage so that the robots don't hurt them, right? I mean, it's a little scary. So we want to think about it more from the terms of how do we build it so that it's for good, for benefiting humanity. One of the things that happens in healthcare, I heard this quote, thankfully it was in one of my organizations. It was from a nurse, and there was a predictive algorithm that was built. It was built on not great data, and so when they launched it without a good amount of testing, it wasn't working. It predicted something, right? So it predicted risk of something in healthcare, and it just was basically not a good score. It didn't work very well. And what happened was, the quote from one of the nurses was, look, you guys went through all of this work to launch this, to provide this to us as a tool. It's garbage. It takes up my space, I have to click around, it's good. I don't know if I can ever trust one of these again. Right? So this goes to the heart of the idea of we are instilled right now with holding the trust in the AI and machine learning systems. If we botch it, our end users, our customers, the people that we work with, we want to have to build to help. That trust is gone, and it's really, really hard to win the trust back. And so that's something too, when you're kind of going through the building process, the iterative wheel that we all kind of think about is making sure that it's tested and ready to go and beta tested by the end users, and so that you can build trust, because once it's gone, it's gone. So these are kind of things that distilling it all down, right? So what is our responsibility? I think I'm doing okay on time, but we want to build things that buy back our time, right? I don't want to have to look at my calendar every 30 minutes to figure out where I'm supposed to be for my next meeting. Just tell me where I'm going, right? Automate that process of my day for me, I would be super happy. That would be fantastic. Driving, right? Get into a vehicle that you can trust will deliver you safely from point A to point B, and I can call my family. Not worry about it, right? I can play a game on my phone. I can scroll Instagram. I can do whatever it is I want to do with my time while this automated task is taken care of from by a system. Increase trust, right? The onus is on us to make sure that we really, again, I argue it's up there with ethics as well, right? Think about the ethical implications. One of the things I like to say is once you know something, you can't unknow it, right? So I talk with my leaders often about, hey, you could certainly feel free to ask me that question, and if I provide you the answer, what does that mean, right? You kind of go to those tasks and those thought processes, and they go, yeah, I don't really want to ask you that question. It's like, that's right. Touch on this slightly, but the idea of decreasing cognitive load, right? Making processes and systems easier to do rather than harder. Right now, especially in healthcare, we have these electronic medical records that have been built and implemented in the last 15 years or so. And they make providing care difficult because there's no longer just the physician or the nurse or the care provider in the room with the patient. You have the provider, the patient, and the computer, right? And so think about the last time I went to the physician's office. It's something we talk about a lot in my world, is you've got the provider and the patient, and then you have the computer, and they're working in the computer trying to make sure that they're keeping everything going and smoothly to record the data for us, for me and my team, to be able to do some amazing work on the back end. But the idea is we want to make sure that we're decreasing the cognitive load of what are the systems that we're building to do, so it's easier to use, right? Our smartphones are great examples. How hard is it to dial a phone number now? Who dials a phone number anymore, right? Call mom. You can do it with your voice at this point. The cognitive load for completing that task is decreased drastically. So I'd say that's one of the better issues that's on this. This is a great quote. I believe it was Dr. O'Hara that said this one, but we want to build AI to imitate humans at our best and not at our worst, right? Again, super easy to say, very hard to do. Think about what are the optimal ideas that you have and bringing those into the world through automated AI systems or machine learning, not just, no offense, somebody sells ads for a living, right? But it's like, let's sell more ads, right? Let's get you to buy more stuff. Like, that's part of it. We're able to borrow and use their technology ideas, but we want to do it, I want to do it to make humans healthier and happier. So, take-home messages, right? We want to make sure we're building it to mimic the best of human behavior and decision making. We want to think about being as transparent as possible, right? So decrease the amount of black boxness. So if somebody says, why is it giving me this response? Why is it suggesting this for me? We can ideally go back there and say, these are the factors that are involved in that. help make us more human, right? Let humans do what humans are good at, just talking to each other, communicating, telling stories over a campfire, staring at your phone in a crowded space makes it so that space goes by faster, but it's not what we're really good at, unfortunately. And the last part, right, is the tool is here, and it's up to us to determine how to use it. And that's especially takes home for this group because we're the ones helping to build it, right? So we get to help kind of guide that conversation, and the onus is on us because the next generation is coming up, right? I want to make sure that we leave them with a better world than we found it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Feel free to connect with me however you'd like, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
I've heard the kind of phrase before, self-driving cars would be great if everybody had one. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think, I have friends that work in the transportation industry in this field specifically, and kind of what I'm asking them about or badgering them about is, we're not going to get to 100% market saturation. And their response is, that's okay, because if you have a human driving, there will be enough cars, future state, right? Enough vehicles, mobility units is what they're trying to call them, linked to where they know, the computer knows, the AI system knows, there's a human 3 blocks up, heads up, they're doing pretty good, but they're not very good on signaling for left-hand turns. Beware of that. So it essentially flows around them, basically, right? Or if you're the human in the group and you're like, I'm going 100 miles an hour, theoretically, they would move out of your way. That won't happen, right? But so it's a great point, and I think the connectivity among vehicles will increase for sure, and so it might help to take care of alleviate that, or it could just be botched and another do. But I think it's coming. Yeah.
What do you?
Oh, there's a double question. Yeah.
I was just wondering, what is the concern, if any, with like any type of AI system being hacked, like self-driving cars? If somebody could just hack it and be like, let's just have everything crash into each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we all know, the more reliant we become on technology, the more possibility there is for nefarious actors to do harm. I think right now the big discussion on the voting systems that are becoming automated, or mobile voting and that kind of stuff, it's a huge deal. So that's where we're partnering with security experts to make sure, if something is hacked, it shuts itself down or has kind of those systems in place where they, it's alerted and warned and then says, okay, because, again, technology is not the evil thing, it's how we use it, right? And so building the systems so that they're as robust as possible is super important. Yeah.
What do you think about the laws that they're making in Europe around AI, that they're already starting to make before AI becomes prevalent?
Yeah, you mean like the GDPR laws for the data privacy?
They're also like starting to regulate like what you can put AI on and how it can be used.
So they're discussing it now. I think they're still in the place where they haven't landed on what they're going to do. Like the article I was just reading, I think it was yesterday, was London police are going to publicly announce they're using facial recognition technology as essentially a net to try and capture a list of targeted individuals that are wanted criminals. But they're going to publicly say where they're using it, from what times to kind of instill the trust, which is like great. My youngest brother's a police officer, and his great quote to me is, we only catch the dumb ones. He's like, if you're a criminal and you're worried about getting caught by a facial recognition technology, and the police are telling you, hey, we're going to be at Buckingham Palace area from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., great, I'll get my hot dog somewhere else, right? I'll get my fish and chips somewhere else down the street. But I think they're having a conversation in a very different way amongst data privacy, and they're leading the way in that sense of the right to be forgotten and also data sharing across platforms, whereas here in the US, it's definitely the Wild West still. Great example, so last week I was in Florida giving a keynote run by a company that's based out of the UK, and one of the presenters asked, well, can I share my email with the group here? And they said, absolutely not. Like, we will not share any of your data, even if you ask us to do so. Like, they were bound by GDPR where they couldn't share a single thing amongst attendees to share it publicly. So yeah, very different, whereas here it's like, hey, Sarah, can I get the data science email list? I'm not asking that, right? But if I did, you'd be like, sure, here you go. And so in that sense, I think they're very much ahead of where we are. California's trying to catch up. I know they have I believe it's passed, or it's coming soon. It did pass? Okay. Has it been implemented yet?
Yeah, it's been for our years.
Okay.
Where I work there, our vendors work with some companies in California.
Yeah.
We can't do this anymore.
Yeah. So I think the conversation is coming more big deal. Yeah.
How long before you think like voice recognition's in like a doctor's office, so then the doctor just asks questions and the AI can just tell them what they have by the end of it, you think?
Yeah, so two-part question in there, right? Like when's voice recognition coming to doctor's offices? I know personally there's some huge companies that are working on that, because if you have an Alexa, it works pretty well, right? Alexa, turn off the lights or play Bob Dylan, it happens. The second part of the question will be much harder, where when will the AI system be able to make a diagnosis, right? So that goes back to the idea of having the human in the loop. And so what I tell physicians, friends of physicians, is look, I'm never going to tell you exactly what the patient has. I'm going to say these are the 3 highest probability diagnoses out of the interaction you just had and all of the data that's gathered on that patient before they came to your office visit or your interaction with them, that these, this is your differential diagnosis potentially. And you absolutely, as a human being, have the understanding and skills and expertise to say, nope, that's garbage, they have this. Right, and so soon-ish, right, 5 to 10 years, but that kind of gets to the idea of, the buzzword I'm hearing now is ambient computing, right, where the keyboards go away, and we just do things by voice or however else we want to interact with them. And so hopefully, knocking on wood, because healthcare will be an adopter of that, quickly when the technology becomes available, so that it's no longer the patient, the physician or nurse in the room, and the computer. It's just back to physician and patient. Yeah.
The transparency thing is really interesting to me, and it seems like a lot of people that work with AI systems might not even know why those systems are making the decisions they do.
Yeah.
So is it on the developers to build that in from the get-go so that the system will always be reporting what's going on?
So great question, right? And I think back to my conversation with Camille, the intellectual property attorney, because we haven't had that legal case yet. So there's no legal law. There's no law of the land that says this is where the bricks are in the road or where the curbs and gutters are. But I think it's something that, as a developer, as something building, start thinking about it, right? Because future state might say, okay, great, past this cutoff point, if you can't show me all the backlogs, the actions, the full back end, I don't know if we can use that algorithm or not. We don't know if we can use that machine learning tool or not. And so will it be more work? Yeah, absolutely. But if there's a horrible event that occurs, troubleshooting will be much easier, right? They'll be like, I don't know, neural net said 90, so we went with 90, we're good to go. It didn't work. It's like, well, what was wrong? There's tons of stories along that, unfortunately, but I think be able to kind of understand why you're getting that result, and then be able to, if you need to retrain the model or kind of go back through and reset as possible, or shut it off. That's the project. So not yet, I would say. It's still definitely in the forefront, but it's something where, I tell my interns, individuals that I work with, start thinking about it. Right? Write beautiful code in the sense where if you come back in 3 years and haven't thought about it, what did you write for yourself? Well, what's working? Even if the program's working fine the whole time, it's never new. But just in case you haven't had to revisit it. Yeah.
It brings back to that, the problem that, is there any piece of software anywhere in the world that's more than 5 years old and has been worked on by more than 5 people that anybody can tell you without a doubt how it does what it does?
Yeah. I mean, exactly, right? Yeah. Yep. So that goes back to the idea of, when you have hackers coming at huge systems, right, building those in. And I think that's what makes us uncomfortable from my perspective as human beings, is that we recognize the power of this technology. We're starting to implement it in certain places, but we also recognize that, if I pick up a hammer, it's great to pound nails, but it's also a great way to settle a dispute with my neighbor if needed, right? It's not the hammer's fault, it's my fault. So hopefully that's something I leave you with.
No camera.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll cut it off before.
All right, good. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it. You good to go?